Southeast England Faith Forum's interfaith lecture series is called the Elizabeth Dankerson Memorial Interfaith Lecture. It is in honor of a recently deceased friend, not so recent, but feels so recent, friend who served with distinction on Seaforth for years on 3 sacres, Hants, Portsmouth and Southampton, and helped organize events for the National Association of Teachers of RE. In the picture, you see Elizabeth in past years. This lecture is the 5th one in the series, and we welcome Rabbi Rene Pfertzel, and I'm going to share the poster for those who haven't seen it before. Here you go. Rabbi Rene was born in France. He has a PhD in biblical studies. After a career in education in France, he decided to become a rabbi. He was ordained in London in 2014, and since then, he has held different pulpits in the UK. He became Rabbi of Maidenhead in September 2024. Rabbi Rene will explore some of the underlying trends of Jewish history in the topic titled Judaism, an Evolving Tradition. Thank you. Rabbi Rene, I'm going to hand over to you. Welcome.
Thank you, Emel. Thank you all to be here tonight. So the theme of this lecture, I can explain to you a bit how it came to my mind. I was thinking, because the theme was quite open. It was presenting something about Judaism, and then I thought, but what Judaism are we talking about? Because I'm a Reformed Jew. This is a Reformed synagogue. There are liberal Jews, there are Orthodox Jews, Masorti Jews, etc. So there's a whole palette of denominations within Jewish community, and of course with the secular Jews, humanistic Jews. So there are many forms of Jews, and I thought it would be actually interesting to try to think about Jewish history since its origin, and just, of course, I'm not going to talk about everything in an hour because that's going to be a lifetime of study. But just to point some of the turning points. Sometimes it was the breaking points, as we shall see in a moment, but turning point in Jewish history. And of course, I will finish with the most recent one, which is the Shoah and the creation of the State of Israel. And just a disclaimer: I'm not I'm not going to enter in any of the debates, the current debates about what's happening at the moment. I will talk about what it meant in the larger Jewish history, because what's happening at the moment is completely, we're still in the row of it, and I don't want to talk about it because it's too complicated. So I'm going to share my screen, if I can do that. Okay, so this is where share and Microsoft Points. So, I think no, it's not here. Yeah, brilliant. So Judaism is an evolving tradition. First, there's a book that was published like 10 years ago that by a famous Israeli author, Amos Oz, and his daughter, Fania Salzberger. They wrote a book in English, actually, not in Hebrew. They called Jews and Words. And they said, ours is not a bloodline, ours is a text line. And what they said in this book is actually Judaism is a conversation across generations and spaces. So it started, of course, in biblical time, in the legendary part of the Bible, and then it became a conversation with people from all over the place. So I found it with this idea very interesting to see Judaism as a conversation across generations. There is this notion of Masorah, of tradition, which is very important. We transmit a tradition from one generation to the other, and each generation reads it in its own ways. And for some things that are for us important maybe were not important, like 500 years ago, as something that are important 1,000 years ago are of no relevance for us today. I mean, there are some very specific example. According to the Deuteronomy, you can sell your daughter in slavery. So that's biblical law. And of course, nobody does that. And polygamy was the norm in the book of Genesis. They didn't have one wife, but several wives. So, and in the 10th century, there's a Ashkenazi rabbi in Germany who issued what's called in Hebrew a takana, which is a legal statement that said polygamy is forbidden. But in the Sephardi world, in the Arab countries, where polygamy was not an issue, they allowed this until the 18th century. So just that gives you an example on how things have evolved. So what I really want to explore is some of the turning points that shaped Jewish faith and practice. I'm pretty sure that a Jew living in the time of King David in Jerusalem would come in one of our synagogues and wouldn't understand where he is. He wouldn't understand the language. I mean, even if you use Hebrew, he wouldn't understand, the practices, etc. So there's lots of things that have changed. And the way we Jews today understand our service tradition is from one passage in the Talmud, in the tractate Pirkei Avot, that says Moses received Torah at Mount Sinai, this moment of revelation, and handed down to, and then you've got the several steps. It started with Joshua, with the prophets, the men of a great assembly, etc., etc., etc. And so there's this idea of a tradition that is transmitted, but that changes. It's not the same as it was 2,000 years ago. So how does it work? Okay, so how do I? Oh yeah, okay, brilliant. So that's I just wanted to bring this. It's a photo from a city in northern Israel near the Lebanon border in a place called Dan, which was one of the Israelite cities at the time of the kings. So there's not much left, but that was biblical Jews were actually living in these kind of places. And Dan had a special place. Dan, there was a place of worship in Dan, which was a problem for Jerusalem, and they had lots of fights about this. But again, that's something that is also throughout the Jewish history. So the biblical Judaism is centered around the temple. So everything is about worshipping at the temple, the sacrifices, the priests, the categories of Kohen, Leviim, and Israel that comes from this time. So the priests, who are the descendants of Aaron, Moses' brother, were in charge of everything that happened in the temple, and everything that people would do was actually offering a sacrifice. For example, you've sinned for some sort, then you go to the temple and you offer this and that. And if you're familiar with the book of Leviticus, there's a lot of sacrificial details about what to bring as and when. And 3 pilgrimage festivals, Pesach, Sukkot, and Shavuot, are also very important. Because there are these moments where the whole people would come. And, in those days, biblical Judaism, most Jews were living in the land of Israel. They didn't have a diaspora at that time. It's later that the diaspora started. So for them, it was quite close, and it was nearby. I mean, nearby as it can be nearby. Okay. No, sorry. So that's the first temple of Jerusalem. Very small, as you can see. You see the, and that's a reconstruction according to the biblical text. So you've got the altar where all the sacrifices were made. You've got the two columns of the temple. Then you've got the temple itself, and the back of the temple where the Ark of the Covenant was kept is called the Holy of Holies, where nobody would enter except the high priest once a year. And there was many rules around that. He needed to have a belt around his waist just in case he would drop dead, so they could actually pull him out because he couldn't, nobody could enter that, etc., etc. So there's also the laver, etc. So the different courts. So it was a small, it's the equivalent of a football game pitch. Okay, no, sorry. Oh, well, okay. So first breaking point is 586, the destruction of the first temple. So according to the biblical narrative, the tribes wandered in the desert for 40 years. Then under the leadership of Joshua, they entered the promised land, and then they occupied the promised land. And there's lots of violent texts there which are problematic for us today. And then they established the 12 tribes, 10 within the land of Canaan, between the Jordan and the sea, and 2 outside in the northern part of near Syria. Then they wanted a king, of course, because they wanted to be like the others. So they asked for a king. Then King David, there was a one before, we didn't stay long, King Saul, and he doesn't have a great reputation in the biblical narrative, but the big king was David, his son Solomon, and when Solomon died, his kingdom was split into entities, the kingdom of Israel in the north, and the kingdom of Judah in the south. The kingdom of Israel was destroyed by the Assyrian the 8th century, 720 BCE, and Judah was destroyed in 586 BCE. This is when the temple was destroyed, right? So that was a big, big, big shock because the people was exiled. They left. They were taken to Assyria. They had to reinvent, their collection with Jewish tradition, with the biblical text, and of course there was only about 40 years between the first and the second temple, but this time of the exile it played an important role. Lots of the principles and lots of the beliefs that are distinctively Jewish were actually thought about in this exilic period. Then they came back, of course, but when we see, the first places like synagogue, it wasn't synagogue yet, but in places of prayer, Torah study, etc. So, second, gosh, yeah, I mixed up my slide, sorry. The second destruction in 70 CE, which is well known, the second temple of Jerusalem was destroyed in 70 CE, and this is where everything changed completely because this was the last temple, and there was a few attempts in the Middle Ages with Byzantine emperor called Julian the Apostate, who wanted to recreate the Temple of Jerusalem because it was an anti-Christian policy. It wasn't really pro-Jewish, but it was anti-Christian. So this is from the Ark of Titus, which you can find in Rome today, where you see, the menorah. So the Roman legion bring the menorah and the treasure of the Temple of Jerusalem back to Rome, and all these things disappear. We don't know where they're gone. So there's of course lots of fantasy about the Ark, which is here. Where is it gone? And of course, Indiana Jones apparently has found it again. But there's all this fantasy about the treasure of the Temple of Jerusalem. So I'm just going to go back. No. Oh dear. Okay. The second destruction is 70 CE. So that's the complete end of a sacrificial system. So there are no sacrifices anymore. The idea is still kept in Torah because it's in the book of Leviticus, it's very central, but there are no sacrifices anymore. The priests, the Kohanim, their authority is actually retreating because their main point of authority was the temple. But you've got the rise of a rabbinic movement. So the rabbis were not priests, are not priests, but there were a group of learned people who decided to learn Torah. And they transform, and this is, I think, the genius of rabbinic Judaism, which we are still inside at the moment. The genius is actually to replace the temple, the worship in the temple, by what's called avodat alev, the worship of the heart. So the 3 daily sacrifices are replaced by 3 daily prayers. There are many, many things that are reinterpreted in different ways to make that all the mitzvot or the commandments, which were originally allocated to the temple, either are not used anymore. There's about 1/3 of all these commandments, or they have been changed. And then they created, which really makes the core of rabbinic Judaism, the Mishnah and the Talmud. So briefly, it's a commentary, and the Mishnah is a commentary on the 5 books, the 5 first books of the Bible. And so it was, I mean, rabbis, they love to talk, right? So they would, meet in academies, sit around the table and talk about this particular law. And at some point, they started to record what they were saying and to write it down. So there's a first layer, which was compiled sometimes in the 3rd century, the first part of the 1st century CE. And then there's another layer in 2 different big centers, one in Babylon, where there was a big Jewish community until the 20th century, actually. The Jews of Iraq are the descendants of this diaspora. And the Jews in the land of Israel, mainly in Galilee, in the north of the city, because they were forbidden to settle in Jerusalem, because in the meantime there were 2 Jewish revolts against the Romans, who were punished, etc. It's also the start of a bigger Jewish diaspora. So the first one started in 586, and they were mainly exiled towards the east, towards the Muslim countries. No, not Muslim, the Eastern countries, because there was no Islam at that time. But, towards modern-day Iraq, Iran, etc. And then after the second destruction of 70, Jews moved within the Roman Empire. So they established themselves in Northern Africa, in Spain, in southern France, and then they followed the Roman legion towards the north. And the first Jews to establish themselves in Germany were in the 1st century, etc. So then they became a kind of diasporic people. So there was still the center in the land of Israel, especially in the north, and then all these different communities living either in the west or in the east. So of course, the big change, and I think I can. The big change, that's the Middle Ages, roughly. The big change in the 7th century is the rise of Islam. That changed a lot in Western, in European history and Middle Eastern history. So roughly here you've got in yellow the maximum expansion of Islam in the West, and in green the maximum expansion of Jews in Europe, right? So there was 2 distinctive Jewish groups that developed in the early Middle Ages and Middle Ages. The Jews who lived under the Crescent, the people who lived in Arabic lands, they had their life was, quite easy, to be honest. They had a status of dhimmi, so they had to pay a tax, and then they were allowed to practice their religion without limitation. Of course, the law of the land was more important. In the western part of Europe, in Christendom, it was more complicated because there's the question of Jesus, who was Jewish, and the Jews, etc., etc. So In the West, they took the full blow of the rising anti-Judaism in the Middle Ages. So you've got this big cultural era. So I'm sorry, there's only the Western bit here, but if you think about, so there was a big Jewish community here in the north of Africa as well. In Sicily, a huge Jewish community working alongside with the Muslim and the Christians, because Sicily was also one of these places in the Middle Ages where there were three communities. Spain, there was a golden age in Spain. Under the Islamic rule until the 13th century. And then, so these Jews were called the Sephardi Jew, coming from the Hebrew name for Spain, which is Sfarad. Then in Europe, you had Jews living in northern France, in the Rhine Valley. So they established themselves in England after with William the Conqueror after 1066. And of course, there's a very large community in Eastern Europe, in Poland, Latvia, etc., the Ashkenazi Jew. So this is where Jews were living. Now, of course, that has an implication, very important one. You don't live as a minority in isolation, right? When you live in a country, you adopt very often the language of the country where you live. You adopt, look, I've got very westernized clothes myself, and I'd rather, when you live in a country, you adopt, the general trends of a country. And in the Golden Ages, there was loads of dialogues between the Muslim scholars and Jewish scholars, and even Christians, where it was sometimes a bit more complex, but there was a lot of dialogue. So, for example, Maimonides, which is very interesting, Maimonides was Sephardi Jew, so he's from Spain. Then he moved to Egypt. There was a big Jewish community there. So he was influenced by Islam because he lived his entire life in Islam. So he was very much influenced also by the philosophy of Muslim scholars. So he tried to harmonize Torah with philosophy, which was something nobody did before. And then, of course, there's the Kabbalah, which also grew in this kind of intercultural exchanges in the Muslim world and in the Spanish world. And there were this kind of cross-pollination of ideas. So now we turn to the 18th century. So, as I said, it's going to be a very rough, but I really wanted to make the point of these turning points in Jewish history. So Napoleon le Grand. So in the 18th century started in Western Europe a movement called the Enlightenment, which is basically the age of reason, also the idea that what is the center is humans and not God, also the idea of equality of all human beings, there's no difference anymore, etc., etc. So the first element was Jews started to gain civil rights, especially in Western Europe. So it started in France in 1790 and 1791. And then, I know that Napoleon is not loved in this country, not much in France, to be honest, either, because he was quite warlike. But when Napoleon occupied, let's say, almost half of Europe, especially all the western parts of Europe, he brought with him the Napoleonic Code of Law and the civil rights and the emancipation of the Jews. So Jews in Western Europe, in Germany, in Italy, in France, were emancipated and gained civil rights. Not in Eastern Europe, which was not touched by that, so it took more time for that. And North Africa and Jews in Arab countries, they were not exposed to that just yet. It's just after the colonization. And the emancipation actually posed a very, very big challenge. Now, so the challenge was as follows, and I think for any minority in the world, it's an interesting one. Now what you don't need to live in your enclosed villages or quarters. Now that you can be part of a larger society, what do you want to do? What are you doing with your identity? And what do you want to do with being Jewish in France or Britain or Germany? Are you a British citizen, a French citizen, and you're Jewish? And the idea was, you can be whatever you want at home, but in the street, you are French citizen, French, German, Italian, etc., etc. So then this is where all the movements we know started actually to emerge as a response to modernity. So many Jews actually left Judaism. They thought, that, and I traced a large part of my families in Alsace who actually in the 19th century, they left completely the community. We don't want to be Jewish, it's only be aggravation, so let's forget about it. When you had people who say, no, the modern world is really bad, we don't want to do anything about it, we don't want to be part of it, so they stayed in this self-imposed little ghetto. And then you've got all the people who said, okay, the Reform, conservative, modern Orthodox, so how do we deal with the tradition? How much modernity do we include in our tradition? How much, for example, the scientific exploration of religious text, which is kind of in some parts of the world, it's still almost blaspheme to speak about that, because in a way you imply that all these texts have human authors. So actually, Christians started in the 17th century to question, the historical the history of a biblical text. And then in the 19th century, that came into Judaism as well. They started to think about these texts as a historical phenomenon that can be studied like anything else. And then you start seeing evolution, changes, transformation, and then you start validation of changes, which makes, so in the religious world, it's really problematic for some people. But if you read these texts as the result of a history, then you can actually make changes. So these are all the challenges that modern Jews were faced with. And religion, so, Jewishness becomes about peoplehood, culture, and ethics. That's something also important. The notion of a Jewish people, which had a religious dimension before, especially about Jewish identity, in the wake of all the nationalistic movements in the 19th century in Europe, the French nationalism, British, etc., etc. There's a lot of nationalism everywhere. So Jews said, okay, let's have our nationalism as well. And this is where Zionism comes from. So now, 20th century, so the Shoah. There's, since especially in Western Europe, since the 3rd or 4th century, there's a growing anti-Judaism that really made increasingly difficult for Jews to function in the societies. And that's a long trend in Western Europe. There's a kind of an obsession with, the Jews didn't accept Jesus. Basically, that was, the foundation of this first anti-Judaism. And then in the 19th century, it became also racism. Jews are a race. And because they live everywhere, because they have, they live everywhere, they are a danger. And, when Hitler started his anti-Semitic laws, he didn't build out of nothing. He built upon a tradition that started 15 centuries ago in Europe. So, of course, you all know about the Holocaust or the Shoah. I don't like Holocaust, but Holocaust is a religious term that means a sacrifice, and Shoah means destruction. It's just a political, there's nothing religious in the Shoah. So you all know that, I don't need to explain that. 3 years after the end of the Second World War, the State of Israel was created. So again, that's in the wake of, the Shoah and the realization what happened during the war. probably gave people who voted for the creation of, for the partition of Palestine into two lands, probably they gave them, yeah, let's do it now because that's been too much. So when I ask the question, what is Zionism? Of course, today Zionism is this kind of insult. You call the Zio, etc. But historically speaking, Zionism first has different forms. You've got different types of Zionism. From the extreme forms we can see in the West Bank with the settlers, who are the extreme messianic radical Zionism. They want to get rid of anyone else. To the form of Zionism, which is cultural Zionism. There was a big debate in the 19th century between the father of political Zionism called Theodor Herzl, was this Austrian Jew who came to France, to Paris, to cover the Dreyfus case. And when he saw that even in this country that gave Jews equality of rights, you could find people shouting death to the Jews in the streets, he said there's no other way than creating a Jewish state. So that's the birth of political Zionism. And there was another Jew from Odessa in Ukraine called Ahad A'am, who said to Pfertzel, we don't need a state. We just need a place where we can actually develop our culture. We don't need all the things that come with a state, like an army, taxes, law, etc. We don't need that. But of course, after the Shoah, there was no debate anymore. There was this feeling there's nowhere safe, and we need this safe space. And of course, the big change, and we see one of the latest development of this question, for people for 2,000 years didn't have any political power, was always under the rule of others, and always have to navigate being a minority in other countries. Suddenly there is power, suddenly there is political power in a very difficult environment, because most of the neighbors didn't accept the partition of 1947, so they had to develop an army, and which is very strong. And so now you've got the question, we didn't have power and now we have power. So what do we do with that? I'm going to leave the question here because I really don't want us to start commenting on the news, because that's not the purpose. I can tell you from a Jewish perspective that what's happening at the moment in Gaza is a profound crisis within the Jewish community. And I can tell you, as a rabbi, I hear this every day. People are completely lost to see what's happening there. The division within the community is huge. Between the people we say Israel is committing a genocide because we are Jews, we say that now, to the people we say, anyway, the Arabs, they just, they call it upon themselves. So you've got all these different views, and that the majority of Jews I know are really troubled by what's happening in Gaza. So I guess it will end, God willing, it will end soon. And then we'll have to rebuild. And we have to rebuild our communities and trust with the other communities. So I think what we're doing today is very important. But please, I know that everybody talks about that, and I don't want to silence any discussion about that. But I think it's important for us, if we think about trajectory of Jewish history since the Bible, that you had military power when they had the kingdoms. Then you had military power when they had the Hasmoneans. They fought against the Greek, and they recreated a kingdom that lasted for 130 years. And now there's a new situation where Jews have power. And there are all these questions. What does it become? When you think about what's happening in the West Bank, these people who I dislike, I can't tell you how much I dislike them, they are, it's not political for them anymore. For me, they are the response of Hamas. Hamas is not political, Hamas is religious. And the settlers in the West Bank, they are religious as well. So we've got a religious war now happening there, which is really not what we want to deal with. So this is where we are today, with absolutely wonderful city of Jerusalem, where I lived for some time. I loved it. I love the diversity of the old city. I loved, the fact that I had Palestinian neighbors who used to be in the same park and have a picnic on Shabbat. I loved walking in the streets. And of course, last time I went there in February, this is not the case anymore. And there is a deep sense of trauma everywhere. There's a lot of tension in the country because it's a country at war. But Jerusalem is still an absolutely gorgeous city, and I really hope that this place where where the temple stood once, when you've got these two gorgeous mosques, I mean they're absolutely gorgeous. I hope that this will become again a place of peace. In the prophets, you've got this idea of Jerusalem being the place of peace for all people. So sometimes maybe we need that. So today, where are we today? 70s, 60s, 70s, 80s in the Jewish world, like in other parts of the world, feminism, what's the place of women in religion? LGBTQ inclusion, what's the place of LGBT people in our communities? Interfaith dialogue, which has become so important for us as a way, to create friendship and connection. So this has changed and reshaped. We have in our part of the Jewish community, in the Reform part, we have female rabbis. The first one was ordained 50 years ago in this country, and a bit earlier in the US. We have gay and lesbian rabbis. That's not an issue anymore. Now we've got also the question of postmodernity. I mentioned modernity a moment ago. Postmodernity is really the big challenge, but not just for us, for the whole world. What's happening today with truth? In dialogues, for example, how can we've got so much access to information, and yet nobody is able to say this is the truth. And in some places, when people disagree with each other, they don't listen to an argument. They say this is a fake news. So we hear this all the time. So the truth has really become a real issue in the postmodern world. The question of authority also is becoming very individualistic. So we don't trust our politicians. We don't trust people in authority anymore. There's also the question of identity in postmodernity. We are this, and that. We are the crossroads of different identities. So how do we navigate that? And I think that's the next step for the Jewish community and for the other communities, because I think all these questions, we will be able to answer them only together. That's probably why interfaith work is so important, because I don't know which communities you represent around the screen, but you probably face the same issues in your communities as well. We are facing the same challenges of postmodernity. How do we become an inclusive society that embraces diversity? And when you see how the world is going now, people are more and more afraid. People are more and more, withdrawing into themselves, seeing the other as a threat. Because there's a lot of uncertainty. We don't know what's happening anymore. And there's also the neoliberalism, which created this kind of monsters capitalism that is really reshaping also our mentalities, etc. So there's a lot of big challenges that await us, and I think that it's really by dialoguing together and finding solutions, because today the challenges are global, so the solutions can only be global. So guys, thank you. I'm going to stop here. I don't know how long did I talk. 40 minutes. So that was what you said to me, ML, right? Okay, brilliant. So I saw that there was some comment. I didn't pick up the.
May I just,
Yeah.
just for the sake of logistics, we are going to open up question and answer session. And I would like people to put up hands, digital hands, to ask questions. Then I will invite your questions first come, first served basis. And I see some of the names that I don't recognize. So if you are not in our mailing list, please do put your email in the chat line so I can send the recording of this lecture, marvelous lecture. Thank you, Rene.
Thank you.
And also, I would like to say I'm not used to chairing meetings. Our design chair, Stephen Wickers, unfortunately has to go to hospital. His wife is having an operation, unfortunately. And so please do say a prayer for his wife, Rebecca. And apologies for any mistakes I have made for stepping in at the last minute. Also, you do realize that this meeting has started an hour before our usual time because of Rene's commitment. And thank you very much for accommodating that as well. So let's open up the questions. And please do feel free to say your faith and where you stand. And also put your email address in the chat line. Thank you.
And Christine.
Yes, hello. Thank you.
Hello.
I'm a visitor, so this is lovely to join you all. My question about Judaism is about how easy or not it is to leave or join the religion. I'll tell you, my impression is that you're born into it, and unless you marry in and convert, it's quite difficult to join. And I don't know what the rules are about leaving. So I'm a Quaker, and we have fairly liberal in and out, you know, whatever you want to do, rules, lack of rules about that. So I'd be interested to hear.
Okay, thank you. So, so you can become Jewish by conversion, and there is a time of study. So you need to study for a certain number of months. You need to be part of a community, and to identify with the community. And in the end, if you want to, you send to a group of rabbis who will actually say, okay, you're Jewish, and then there's some ritual circumcision for men. There's also the mikveh. You go into a ritual bath. It's not that easy in the sense that it takes at least a couple of years, a year and a half or a couple of years in our communities. If you go to an Orthodox synagogue, it's even much more complicated because it can take up to 10 years. They ask you to live with a Jewish family for a while. So now the question of leaving, there's no procedures to leave. You know, you can't declare yourself, I'm not Jewish anymore. There's no provision for that. But I know that, you know, especially since the last few months, I've heard some people who are saying to me, I'm not Jewish anymore because I can't stand what's happening. You know, it's not in my name. So they leave Judaism, but according to Jewish law, they're still Jewish. You know, there's a principle, you know, even if, you know, whatever you do, you remain Jewish.
Thank you, Rene. Debbie?
Thank you for your lovely talk, Rabbi Rene, and I really have enjoyed it. I'm new to the group. I'm a Baha'i from Dorset. I came at Steve's invitation, and yeah, thanks for mentioning Becky, Emil as well. Rabbi, my question is, you'll probably maybe pick up the Baha'i sort of philosophies in my question. I'm wondering, it's twofold. I'm wondering, do you yourself see a time when the worldwide Jewish community is sort of brought back together? I mean, from all of the various sort of, you've got the liberal Jews, the Orthodox Jews, you know, do you see a time when they are all sort of as one? and also how you mentioned earlier that talking to each other and working with each other as people of various faiths is the way forward, and I completely wholeheartedly agree with that. Do you have any practical sort of solutions that you have found yourself that work? I don't mean globally, you know, but in a sort of immediate sense, in community senses, what have you found works?
So your first question, will the Jewish people be one day? No. I think that's a very short answer, but and I think it's not supposed to be like that. You know, there is a diversity within the Jewish community. There's a sense we belong to the same. Oh, I've lost you. Where are you? Sorry. Yeah, okay, thank you. There's a sense that we belong to, you know, I don't know if you can see, I'm opening, you know, I'm in the synagogue. We've got, you know, the Torah scroll behind me. I don't know if you can see them.
Yes.
So these Torah scrolls are the same for all Jews. So this is the link with all Jewish communities. Jewish time is the same. You know, we celebrate the festivals and Shabbat at the same time. The connection to these very important elements. But then starts all the debates, you know, how do you do Shabbat? How do you do a Pesach? Who is a Jew? And this is where the Jewish element enters in, and it can't be one, because otherwise, you know, that's completely impossible. Now, for the second part of your question, honestly, we have to be very humble, right? It's all about being able to sit together, to listen to each other, accepting that we can disagree, it's fine. But we don't need to be friends and love each other, all of us. But, you know, what's the most important part, I think, is, you know, there's this idea in Judaism that we were all created, but Tselem Elohim, in the image of God. So to recognize that each of us has a sparkle of divine light and therefore deserve, you know, the same respect than any other human beings, you know, which is really not always the case, sadly. If we manage to do that, I think we've done already a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rene. I will invite Elliot and then Arnold, please.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Rabbi Rene. That was unbelievable. I'm very impressed how you managed to squeeze that all into about 40 minutes. Unbelievable. So I work for the Catholic Bishops' Conference of England and Wales, working with the Catholic bishops on interfaith dialogue. And as I'm sure you're aware, this year we celebrate the 60th anniversary of Nostra Aetate, which was a really foundational document in terms of Catholic engagement with non-Christian religions, but more importantly on Catholic engagement with Judaism. And I just wondered, from your perspective as a rabbi, have you noticed that, well, obviously since Nostra Aetate, but in the years where we're living now post Nostra Aetate, 60 years in fact, that it's changed the way that other faiths dialogue with Judaism as well, considering the grandeur of the document itself, but also how have you noticed sort of the engagement in Catholic relations to Judaism, sort of from your perspective?
So I've always, I have no, I mean, the interfaith work we're doing with the Christian communities, the Catholic and all the other Christian denominations, has become much better than it was like 60 years ago, and especially for the past. I mean, John Paul II was also instrumental in all this, you know, developing interreligious between the Jewish community and the Christian community. It's easy. I wouldn't say easy in the sense, you know, easy peasy, there's no issue whatsoever, but we know how to talk to each other because we know the background of each group. And despite that, we know we can talk because we want to look forward and to build for the future. Yeah, that's probably how I see that. I never had any issue. You know, when I was in Lyon, I was a rabbi in Lyon. I had a good relationship with a Catholic church in Lyon, and we invited each other all the time. So it was good, yes. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Arnold, please, I saw your hand up. Please unmute yourself. first? Thank you.
Hello, good evening, everybody. Can you hear me?
We're speaking.
Okay, yeah, this is Naeem Tai from
Um,
Ahmadiyya Muslim
I'm
community. Yeah, can
sorry,
you hear me? Yeah.
I'm sorry, Naeem. We asked Arnold to ask the question. Can you wait after Arnold,
Yeah,
please?
sure,
Thank
sure,
you.
sure, sure.
Thank you.
Arnold, do you manage to unmute
Unmute.
yourself?
Unmute.
Click on the microphone, the red microphone
Oh,
sign.
yes. Okay, yes.
Yes.
Right. Hi. Yes. Hi, Rennie.
Hello.
Very enjoyable. Yes, I was impressed how you condensed 2,000 years in 40 minutes. I'm a member of Maidenhead Shul. I'm not, as Rennie knows, I'm not very observant. But something didn't occur to me. I'd heard it fairly recently. Somebody suggested we commemorate the destruction of the temple on Tisha B'Av every year. Now there's a state of Israel. Why isn't there a temple to replace the previous two? I mean, is that a flippant or silly question? I don't know.
No, that's a very interesting question, Arnold. And to be honest, in Jerusalem, there is a temple institute. They are getting ready for the rebuilding of a temple. And these people are connected with the settlers in the West Bank. So this is their political views. So even Maimonides in the Middle Ages said, we don't need a temple anymore because this was a time when the children of Israel needed this kind of connection with God through sacrifices, but now we have prayers. We don't need a temple. So now rabbinic literatures, the main theme is the third temple will be rebuilt by the Messiah, whenever the Messiah comes, whatever. I know that some people want to rebuild the third temple, but that would be the end of it. I mean, can we imagine? You know, there are two mosques on Temple Mount. Can we imagine? Oh, wow, I can't even imagine how it would start. Can you imagine the global war about, the global war would start with that. And for 99% of Jews, we don't want a third temple. We don't need a third temple anymore. It was part of our history a long time ago, and we managed to survive very well. Yes.
So, yeah.
Thank you.
It could be put elsewhere, somewhere else rather than on.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, but can you imagine the temple time? It smelled like a slaughterhouse. You know, they would slaughter hundreds of cattle and pigeons and burn this and that. It must have been disgusting, and all this blood. You know, it's like you know.
So should we still have Tisha B'Av every year?
That's a very interesting point. So for the others, Tisha B'Av is a fast day in the summer when we commemorate the destruction of the second temple. In the Jewish tradition, this day has become the day when we remember all the catastrophes that fell on the Jewish people, the destruction of the third temple, the second temple, and this and that. Now, I don't know how many Jews. I don't mark Tisha B'Av. I don't mark it because I don't pray for the restoration of the temple. I don't want a third temple, and fine.
Yeah. Okay, great. Thanks, Rennie.
You're
Thank
welcome.
you. Naeem, I'll invite you now, and then Bill and Ron, please.
All right, okay. Thank you very much. Sorry, I didn't see the Arnold's hand beforehand. That's why I thought that you were asking me to unmute. Okay. First of all, there's no question which I need to ask because I'm already very much surprised, pleasantly surprised, that the version of Judaism which we have heard from Mr. Reverend Rene, that is very, promising. For example, they believed in, conversion and leaving the Judaism without any pressure, particularly, and they also, believe in interfaith dialogue, which we
Naeem, you seem to have
We've lost you.
disconnected. Can you repeat again? I know you belong to Ahmadiyya community in Slough. This is what you were saying. You also believe in interfaith dialogue.
interfaith. That's why I was appreciating the lecture or the presentation delivered by Mr. Rene. I am very much happy to know more about Judaism, particularly as Mr. Horner has said already, that he has compressed 2000 history within 40 minutes, and particularly with the photographic, presentation. It was wonderful to understand. I am very much pleased. This is what I wanted to appreciate both of you to arrange this presentation or lecture, as well as Mr. Rene, who has done very well to his presentation. Thank you very much. This is what I wanted to say. Thank you all.
Thank you, Naeem. Thank you.
Thank you, Naeem. I will repeat. I'm going to share this the link, Zoom link, with everyone, so you will have the recording. And feel free to share with your own community. And we also have a Facebook page. I'm going to put it on there as well. So thank you, Bill.
Can I just, reiterate the thanks for such a really wonderful presentation, actually, Rabbi Rene. It was, 2,000 years, well, more than 2,000 years in 40 minutes. Very impressive. I work with schools and support 2 sacres, one of which actually is Slough. And it is the challenge, I think, with religious education is always providing children with a lived experience of what does it mean to be whatever it is in that, and that is really challenging. And I just wondered if you would speak very briefly, it will have to be, about what you would want schools to express or share with children and young people about what does it mean to be Jewish in the world and Jewish in Britain today, and any sort of key points that you think would be important for schools and for teachers to take on board.
Gosh.
Just a small challenge for you.
Yeah. Thank you, Bill, for the question. No, but it's a very interesting point because, often we get to the point where people ask, what's the Jewish position on this and that? And there's never, back to what Debbie said, there's no unified position on anything. So I would say Judaism is, oh God, I've got this fly that is really annoying. So Judaism is a community of people who are linked by the same sacred texts, the Torah, the Bible, the Talmud. We read them in a different ways. We understand them in different ways, but they have this connection through the text. And I think maybe that's the link. I don't know much about Islam, but what I know is that you've got the Sunnite, the Shiite, but they have the same Quran. And then you've got in the Sunni Islam, got all the different schools of interpretation. And I'm sure, I don't know much, so I don't want to say anything that is not right, but I'm sure they struggle with the same. There's not one unified way of presenting things. So it's a community of destiny of people who share the same connection with a set of texts. We have also some cultural markers, that's also something that defines a community, what the common markers, the food, attitudes, Shabbat, for example, which is very important for us, etc. I need to think about, how do, in a few lines, what do we really want people to, when they think about, I can tell you about what, oh, sorry, excuse me, I'm alone here and someone needs to, sorry about that. Hello? Hello. Sorry, there's a meeting later. That's the reason why I had to move, and the first person is coming, but I will ask her to do the doorkeeping. So, sorry, I got lost.
You were saying about the identity and about the different that as with any faith community, but you were united through things like Torah culture, Shabbat, food, and
Yes.
all of those things.
You know, there was an Italian in the 19th century who tried to define what's a nation. So he said a nation is a group of people who share the same language, the same culture, food, that is very important, a territory, and some customs. So in a way, that's also what Judaism is about. It's about sharing some things in common.
I've been a bit of a cheek, and I've dropped you a message in the chat. But thank you for that, because it's just so important, I think, given what is going on at the moment.
Yes.
That with
oh yeah, I remember what I wanted to say. Sorry, I could give you 10 examples of what Judaism is not. So I just need to give this to someone, and then I come back. Just a second. Okay, we won't be disrupted anymore. Fine. Yeah, you know, there's all the anti-Semitic tropes about Jews. So we know that. I mean, if it's like any communities, you've got all these tropes about communities. I mean, we are not ruining I'm sorry to tell you that, but we are not ruling the world. We are not filthy rich. I mean, some of us are, but some of us are not. You know, all these tropes are not true. So, so I think the next is David, I think, if I look at the list, yes.
On my list, it is Ron,
Oh, sorry, okay.
Mr. Mobashir, and Karen and David. Kind of so far, 4 hands. Thank you, Ron.
All right, thank you. And thank you, Rene, for that comprehensive introduction to the history of Judaism. It really is fascinating. I'm part of the Bracknell Forest Sacre. I'm a Free Church member. I'm also a Christian minister, and I've been a lifetime student of the Jewish scriptures. Unfortunately, not in Hebrew, although somewhat in the Septuagint, but mostly in English.
Interesting.
And I'm fascinated. One of the pillars, almost, of the foundations you spoke of, was Torah. And I was wondering, does Torah have any place in the personal devotional life of an individual Jew? And secondly, as I read Torah, I see the covenant made at Sinai, but when you get to Deuteronomy, I see the Torah, I see the covenant that was established at Sinai being expressed in terms of a tenancy agreement for the land. If you keep the tenancy agreement, you keep the land. If you break the tenancy agreement, you'll lose the land. Now, very briefly, could you say something about the place of Torah in the individual devotional life of an average Jew, and maybe something just about this? How does all this fit together if the covenant is no longer operational?
Okay. Oh, wow. So we're going to deep theology here. Thank you. So, so when I say Torah, I think about the first 5 books of the Bible, Genesis, Exodus, etc. So they are very much part of the heart of Jewish life, in the sense that we follow the festivals that are described there, you know, the pilgrimage festival, Yom Kippur, Rosh Hashanah, etc. in the Siddur, in the prayer book that we use on Shabbat and every day, there are some texts from Torah that are also included in that. Lots of the laws about kashrut are already in two places, in one in Leviticus and one in Deuteronomy. So there's a lot of elements of Jewish practice that have a foundation in Torah itself. Some of these things were created by the rabbis later on. For example, in the main prayer, the Shema Israel, the prayer we recite, there are some elements that were understood by the rabbis in different way. Now, the notion of covenant is a very interesting one because it started actually with Abraham. So there's this idea of, I will make a covenant with you. You are a people that is wandering on the earth, but I will give you a land where you can dwell and develop yourself if you keep my commandments. So there's this idea of tenancy agreement, so to speak, kind of okay, I'll give you this land, and then, but you have to be faithful to me. So that's really at the heart. The covenant is sort of agreement between God. So God's part is to give a land, and the Jewish part is to obey God's law. So that's what. Of course, it's very, very much more complicated because it wasn't an empty land, and you've got all these passages where, gosh, that are there's a lot of violence in Torah, in the Bible in general, like in all our religious traditions, right? There is lots of violence in religious traditions. So the question is, what do we do with that? So that we're actually an interesting conversation another time. So how do we deal with violence, religious violence? So already in the Talmud, there are some passages where the rabbi says, okay, it may be written like that. Because it's God's word, we can't really change it. But in order to do this, we have to do this, this. And so in effect, actually canceling the violent aspect. And so there's a lot of things like that. So there are ways to to deal with that. Yeah.
Oh, that's a very good point. How do we deal with violence? And kind of seed of a thought. That's a good one. Thank you.
That would be an interesting question, discussion. Yes.
Yeah. Mr. Mubashir, and then Karen and David, please.
Hi, everyone. My name is Mahmoud Mubashir. I am part of Ahmadiyya Muslim community in Slough. My colleague Naeem Ahmad earlier spoke and commented. I also have a comment. I'm very much appreciative of this sort of interfaith dialogue. Very much thankful to Rabbi Rene, the way he presented Judaism, and extensively, it's so much information given out in a short time. So as a member of Ahmadiyya Muslim community, I am all for this sort of communication within different faiths. This gives us better understanding of each other. And I'm very much thankful to the organizers as well. This is my first time attending this sort of program. So I'm also thankful to all the members who have asked questions, because that has actually given us in-depth understanding what Rene was saying. So thank you very much appreciative, and looking forward to join more of these programs. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mubashir. And the Ahmadiyya Muslim community in Slough, and in general, they do peace conferences, annual peace conferences. So when I receive an invitation, perhaps we could share that as well if you're interested.
Yes, we are planning one in a couple of months' time, and we will share that invitation with all of you. Thank you very much.
Karen.
Thank you. I would really like to thank you, Rabbi Rene, for such an interesting and clear run through the history of the Jewish faith. Hitherto, I've only ever thought of it as groups of events and beliefs, but you gave it a coherence tonight because you managed to go right the way through to the end. And I was particularly struck by the end of what you said, because you talked about post-modernity bringing new questions, and in particular, truth, authority, and identity. And goodness, if they aren't three of the biggest preoccupations and issues that we have to deal with, to grapple with in 21st century life, then I don't know of any. And particularly you highlighted truth being the problem. You talked about people saying things weren't truthful, and if they say them enough times, other people believe them. And right at the end, you spoke about, you asked the question, how do we become an inclusive society? And you project, I have to say, the most wonderful image of inclusivity yourself. You're so relaxed about your religion and so keen to share it in that relaxed way that it's very good to listen to. But you then said by dialogue. Yes, and it is by dialogue. And it's dialogues like this, and those we have with neighbours, including people we don't agree with. But when I think sometimes of what is going on in the world, and I'm sure that a great many people are alongside me, not wanting to put the news on, not wanting to go back to Ukraine, to go back to Gaza, to go back to all the hotspots, to have to listen to the leader of the Western world saying that black is white when it's not. I just wonder, is there anyone in society, in the world anywhere, to whom you would look and say, this person is an inspiration to me of what I believe in? And, you know, I'm kind of thinking of in the past, people like Gandhi and other amazing people who project an image of truth and integrity. And it worries me to death that politics is becoming soiled by that mire of rumor and media misinterpretation that makes someone who endeavors to be full of integrity come across as someone who is just like all the rest. So where do you look for hope? That's my question.
Wow, that's a very interesting question. To be honest with you, I'm struggling a lot. I'm struggling a lot to find clarity of purpose. Struggling a lot not to be too cynical. I don't see at the moment all the people we know, all the vocal people around us, politicians, influencers, all these. I have this kind of, I don't want to listen to them. I look around people around me. And in a way, when I see my congregants, when I see my friends, when I see the people I'm talking to in the street, I see real people. And it's from this experience that I still have hope that human beings, you know, of course, with all our flaws, there's lots of good people around. And if you see that we all share the same, look, sorry, I'm just jumping to something else. When I heard the first time The Merchant of Venice, you know, the Shylock monologue, you know, it's amazing. It's all about, if you tickle me, will I not laugh? If you prickle me, will not bleed, etc. And we need to remember one of the big discoveries for me as a rabbi when I started was then 11 years ago, but I started actually to do some rabbinic work before, is how much fear and suffering there is in the world, right? There's the foundational fear of death, for example, the fear of losing the people we love. There's the suffering of illness, the suffering of uncertainty, and there's something that unites all of us as human beings. So when I'm with my congregation, of course, that's my pastoral role to be with them and to be open to listen to them. But I see the real humanity in the daily life of people around me. And to be honest with you, I met with Theresa May one day in Maidenhead. And for me, Theresa May was kind of, from the way she was described in the media when she was prime minister, she was a bad woman, right? Because nobody actually is ever a good person in the media. And I saw this woman, I thought, wow, you know, she's quite nice. I don't care about politics. You know, as a person, she was warm, she was nice, and of course, there's an element of being a politician, and therefore she needs to be smiley and so. But there's a genuineness that you can feel. So I don't know. To be honest, moments like this that really gives me hope when I see people from different backgrounds being able to sit with each other, spend an hour and a half together, and to talk about these things. Around me, I don't know, because I think it's so blurred. There's almost a PTSD element when you look at the news. And to what extent it's actually engineered. So I don't know. Maybe I don't want to go down this route, but in a way, you know, if you really want to dominate people, make them afraid and hopeless, then they will follow you. And look, I mean, without being too political, look, people like Trump, people like Farage, who's the British equivalent. These people, they say something, they present something, and they live very differently. You know, Farage is presenting himself as a man of the people. He comes from a privileged background, right? And you know, Trump has ruined himself 3 times. You know, all these people, they lie to your face, and yet for some reason, and I see the same in France. You know, they lie to you, and people believe in them. This is really what strikes me the most. How can you trust that? Because they play with people's fear. So yeah, I'm sorry. I don't think I can have. I don't know who is the modern day Gandhi. I don't know. And because every time we have someone like this, he or she is deconstructed, right? Look what they said about Gandhi, that he slept with little girls. Do you remember? It was, 15 years ago that this came out, that kind of, let's deconstruct everything about everyone. So we don't trust anyone anymore. But you just have to look around you to see that actually there are some amazing people around in this world.
Thank you.
Oh, that's very powerful. Thank you, Rene. There are a few comments, and
Oh, yeah.
I will share those quickly and then ask David to ask the last question. In the meantime, you were invited to visit a mosque by Rosie. I'm asking her, which mosque is it? Is that the Slough one? And there are several mosques in Slough. Please identify so I can send the invitation to Rene. Now, Mike Stigall said, thinking about comments during the presentation, perhaps a community of people who share the same text, who are engaged in an ongoing conversation about that text and how to live by it. Good comment, very good. And Mike again says, odd for me to say as a pagan, but the new Pope seems to be working hard to be a good person to look up to in terms of a representation of authenticity and truth. I agree with Bill about Jonathan Wittenberg. Bill has said Rabbi Jonathan Wittenberg gave a powerful thought of the day yesterday. So I'll share that link as well if you don't get it from the chats.
He's a good man. He's really a good man, Jonathan Wittenberg. Yes, someone really worth listening to. Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. Okay, I'm aware that you have a meeting at 7:30.
Oh, it's fine. They can start without me. I've got a couple of minutes, so it's fine.
Okay. In that case, David, can you ask your question, please? Unmute yourself.
Rukiera. Thank you so much for your potted history, which has been great. I'm wondering about a Jew by the name of Sigmund Freud, who started a revolution in the treatment of mental health. Have his theories been an influence in any way on Judaism?
That's a very interesting point, Dave, because I think it's the other way around. It's Judaism that had an influence on the way he discovered the unconscious. You know, if you look at the Talmudic way of discussing, and the Talmud is not a theological treatise as we would understand it. It's an ongoing conversation between rabbis, not only rabbis who lived at the same time, but rabbis who lived sometimes several centuries from each other. This ongoing conversation, which there's a starting point, you go through the association of ideas, and 3 pages, 10 pages later, you reach another conclusion. And this is exactly what, you know, the cure by words is about, you know, association of ideas, etc. So Freud was a very secular Jew. He wasn't religious at all. He had no religious, I don't know if upbringing, I don't know, probably he had the traditional one that everybody had in those days. He wasn't religious at all, but he was profoundly Jewish in the sense of, you know, words matter. Words are very important. We exchange words, and words are what we create universes with words, and we kill people with words. And I think that's probably how he understood that. Now there's also what he did. It's really interesting because I did a wedding at the end of August. One of my rabbinic friends, she was getting married, and she asked me to officiate at her wedding. And we did the wedding at the Freud Museum. And it was so funny because I said, there's not a most Jewish place to do a wedding at the Freud Museum. Yeah.
Brilliant, brilliant. I'm sorry that we haven't got much time for further questions, but that was a marvelous talk, Rene. And
Thank you.
Personally, I have learned quite a lot, and I will be thrilled to share the recording with everyone else. And if you don't have your email with me, please do put in the chat. I'll stay behind a little bit more, a little bit longer. But thank you for coming tonight. And apologies again if I did a bad chairmanship or chairwomanship.
You were really good,
whatever it
Emel.
is.
No, you were a very good chair. Very compassionate. Yes.
I'm getting used to it. Thank you very much.
Thank
for
you,
your
everyone,
patience
for
as well.
listening to me. And I'll see you soon. Huh?
Thank you.
Okay.
Good night.